The morning the agency sent someone new to clean my house, I opened the door already annoyed, already late for a call, already rehearsing the same polite nothing I said to every cleaner who showed up on my porch. Then I actually looked at her face, and every word I had planned fell straight out of my head. Sophie Bennett was standing on my welcome mat with a bucket of supplies in one hand and a clipboard in the other, wearing a gray polo shirt with the cleaning company's logo stitched over her heart, and for one full second neither of us said anything at all. My name is Ryan Cole. I'm 36, I run a mid-size architecture firm out of a converted warehouse downtown, and up until that Tuesday morning, I would have told you my life was finally, boringly stable. I had the house. I had the business. I had exactly the kind of quiet that people spend their 30s chasing. What I did not have, what I had specifically avoided having for almost 10 years, was any reason to think about Sophie Bennett before 10 in the morning. She used to be the girl I planned my whole future around when we were 24 and neither of us owned anything worth insuring. We dated for 2 years in a city that felt too small for both of our ambitions, and then she got the job offer she had always wanted, 3 states away, and she took it without asking me to come. I remember standing in her old apartment while she packed, telling myself I was being mature about it, telling myself that loving someone meant not asking them to shrink their life down to fit next to yours. I was very calm about the whole thing. I was calm about it for exactly 4 days after she left, and then I was not calm about anything for a long time. 10 years is supposed to be enough time to turn a person into a memory. Standing in my own doorway, I found out it was not nearly enough. Sophie, I said, because apparently that was the only word left in me. She blinked hard, like she was hoping I might disappear if she did it enough times. Ryan. Her voice came out flatter than I expected, careful, like she'd practiced staying calm for situations exactly like this one and just never thought she'd need the practice with me. This is your house. It appears to be, I said. You work for Bright Homes now. Since March. She looked down at the clipboard like it might rescue her. I didn't have your last name on the intake sheet. Just an address and a gate code. I go by Cole professionally. Guess the paperwork didn't catch that. We stood there another few seconds, the two of us, a decade of unfinished sentences sitting in the space between the doorframe and the porch step. Somewhere behind her, a lawn crew 2 houses down was running a mower, and I remember being grateful for the noise because it gave both of us something to look at that wasn't each other. I can call the office, she said finally. Ask them to reassign the house. It won't be a problem. That was the exact moment I understood something about myself I hadn't expected to learn on a Tuesday. Every rational piece of me knew the easy answer was yes, reassign it, let a stranger clean my kitchen twice a week, keep my life as uncomplicated as I'd built it to be. But some other part of me, the part that had spent 10 years pretending it didn't still flinch a little every time someone said her name in a story, did not want her to walk back down my driveway and disappear into somebody else's schedule. You don't have to do that, I said. Her eyebrows went up. You want me cleaning your house? I want to know how you ended up doing this, I said, which was honest, and also not the whole truth, and we both seemed to know it. She hesitated with one hand still on the strap of her supply bag, and for a second I saw something cross her face that looked less like awkwardness and more like exhaustion, the kind that lives under a person's skin for months before anybody notices it. It's a long story, she said. And I've got 4 more houses today. Then let's start with the short version. She looked at me for a long moment, weighing something I couldn't see the shape of yet. The short version is my life fell apart about 1.5 years ago, and this is the job that lets me pick my daughter up from school every day. That's it. That's the whole short version. Daughter. That word landed somewhere in my chest I wasn't prepared for. Okay, I said, because it was the only word that felt safe. Come in. I'll show you where everything is. I want to be clear about something before this goes any further. I did not invite Sophie Bennett into my house that morning because I thought there was some romantic story waiting to happen. I told myself, very firmly, walking her through my own kitchen like a tour guide in his own life, that this was simply the decent thing to do. She needed steady work. I needed my house cleaned. Grown adults were capable of doing business together without dragging 10-year-old history into the laundry room. I believed that for almost 6 days. The first week was mostly logistics and careful distance. She came Tuesdays and Fridays, let herself in with the code, and we managed to build an entire routine around barely being in the same room. I left for the office early. She let herself out before I got home. On the days our schedules did overlap, we spoke in short, polite sentences about vacuum bags and window cleaner, the kind of conversation two strangers have, except we were not strangers, and pretending otherwise took more effort than either of us wanted to admit. It was the following Friday when the routine actually cracked open. I came home earlier than planned because a client meeting fell through, and I found Sophie sitting on my back steps instead of working, her cleaning cart parked half-finished in the hallway, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice pitched low and tight in a way that made my stomach drop before I even understood the words. "I know what the lease says, Derek," she was saying. "I know. I'm asking you for 2 weeks, that's all I'm asking for." A pause. Her free hand pressed flat against her forehead. "Because I don't have it yet, that's why. I will have it. I need 2 weeks." I stood in my own kitchen not wanting to be caught listening and not able to make myself walk away either. When she hung up, she sat there another few seconds with her eyes closed, and then she noticed my shoes in the doorway and straightened up so fast she nearly knocked over her own bucket. "You're back early," she said, wiping her face with the back of her wrist like that would erase whatever had just happened on her end of that call. "Client cancelled." I set my bag down slowly, the way you'd move around something easily spooked. "Everything okay?" "Fine." The word came out too fast to be true. "Landlord stuff. Boring." "Sophie." I said it's fine, Ryan. I let it sit for a second, because I remembered enough about her to know that pushing never worked, that she needed room to hand things over on her own schedule or not at all. "All right," I said. But for what it's worth, that didn't sound like a landlord. Her jaw tightened. Something moved behind her eyes, some calculation about how much a person is allowed to admit to someone they used to love and haven't spoken to in a decade. "That was my ex-husband," she said finally. "Mia's father. We're behind on the custody arrangements cost sharing, and he likes to remind me about it whenever it's convenient for him." "How behind?" "Ryan. I'm not asking to embarrass you. I'm asking because you looked like you were about to be sick on my back steps." She let out a breath that had more exhaustion in it than anger. $1,400 behind on my half of a medical bill from when Mia broke her wrist last spring. I've been paying it down. He's decided that's not fast enough for him anymore, and he likes to bring up custody every time he wants leverage, even though there's nothing legally he can actually do with it. It just works on me anyway. That's the whole ugly story. Feel free to go back to pretending we didn't have this conversation. I did not go back to pretending. That was the problem. Over the next 2 weeks, I learned the rest of it in pieces, the way people who used to know each other well relearn things, a little at a time, mostly by accident. Sophie had taken the job 3 states away all those years ago, the one that ended us, and it had actually worked out for a long time. She'd climbed, she'd built a career, she'd married a man named Derek who looked good on paper and turned out to be considerably less good in practice. Then the marriage ended, and the company she'd spent 8 years building her name inside of did a round of layoffs that took her position with it, and within about 4 months she went from a corner office to filling out cleaning company applications because it was the only work she could find that let her control her own hours enough to be there for a 6-year-old who needed picking up from school every single day, rain or shine, no exceptions. "I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me," she said one afternoon, standing in my kitchen with a rag still in her hand like she'd forgotten she was holding it. "I'm telling you because you asked, and because I'm tired of managing what people think when they find out. I used to run a department. Now I clean houses. Both of those are true at the same time. I don't feel sorry for you," I said, and meant it. "I think you're doing something a lot of people wouldn't have the stomach for. It's not about stomach. It's about Mia. Same thing, from where I'm standing." She looked at me a beat too long after that, like the sentence had landed somewhere she wasn't expecting. Then she picked her cart back up and went back to work, and neither of us mentioned it again that day, but something had shifted, quietly, the way weather changes before you can name what's different about the air. I met Mia by accident 3 weeks in, and that was the day everything about this situation stopped being manageable. Sophie's usual sitter had a family emergency, and rather than cancel the job and lose the pay, she'd asked, nervously, almost apologetically, whether it would be all right if Mia sat quietly in the den with a tablet while she finished the house. I told her, of course, thinking it would be simple, thinking a 6-year-old with a tablet was the easiest houseguest in the world. I did not expect to come home from a quick trip to the hardware store and find a small girl with Sophie's same stubborn chin sitting cross-legged on my living room floor, deeply unimpressed with the fact that my Wi-Fi kept dropping. "Your internet is bad," she informed me, without looking up. "I've been told. My mom says you're an old friend." That's one way to put it. She considered this with the total seriousness only children manage to pull off. "Do you have snacks that aren't for grown-ups?" I found her a granola bar and sat down at a respectful distance on the couch, and for the next 20 minutes I listened to a 6-year-old explain, at great length and with excellent hand gestures, why the tablet game she was playing was unfair to frogs specifically. Somewhere in the middle of that conversation, Sophie appeared in the doorway with a dust rag still in her hand, watching the two of us with an expression I couldn't quite name, something between panic and something much softer than panic. "She's not bothering you?" Sophie asked. "She's briefing me on frog rights legislation," I said. "It's very compelling." Sophie almost laughed. Almost. She caught it before it fully arrived, the way you catch yourself before stepping on something breakable. "Mia, sweetheart, let Mr. Cole get back to his day." "It's fine," I said, and I meant it more than I expected to. That night, after they'd gone, I sat in my own quiet kitchen a long time, turning the whole afternoon over in my head like a stone I couldn't stop checking for cracks. I had built my life to be uncomplicated. Steady job, steady house, steady nothing waiting for me when I got home except the peace and quiet I'd told myself I wanted. And now there was a 6-year-old's granola bar wrapper still in my trash can, and I found I didn't hate the mess of it nearly as much as I should have. The trouble started for real about a month after that, and it started, predictably, with Derek. I was working from home that Friday, door open to the yard while Sophie finished up the last room, when a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway hard enough to kick gravel, and a man got out who I understood immediately, without being told, was exactly who I thought he was. Expensive watch, expensive haircut, the kind of confidence men wear when they've never once had to clean up their own mess. "Sophie," he called out before he'd even reached the porch, "we need to talk about this weekend." Sophie stepped outside wiping her hands on a towel, and I watched her whole posture change in real time, shoulders pulling in, chin lifting anyway, the exact contradiction of a person bracing for a fight they refuse to lose. "You can't just show up at my job, Derek." "Your job." He looked past her at the house, at me standing in the doorway, and something ugly moved across his face. "Right. This is the job now. What do you want?" "I want to switch weekends. I've got a work thing." "You had a work thing last time too. And the time before that. It's called having a career, Sophie. Some of us still have one." His eyes flicked to me again, deliberately this time. "Whose house is this, exactly?" "None of your business," Sophie said. At the same moment I said, "Mine." Derek's mouth curled into something that wanted to be a smile and mostly wasn't. "Of course it is. Cleaning the house and the client, very efficient." He looked at Sophie. "This what we're doing now?" I felt something tighten in my chest, the kind of anger that shows up fast and quiet at the same time. I walked down the porch steps before I fully decided to. "I think you should say whatever you came to say about the weekend, and then get back in your car." Derek looked me over the way men do when they're deciding whether a fight is worth the effort. Whatever he saw, he apparently decided it wasn't. "This isn't your conversation. You're standing in my driveway, yelling at someone doing her job." I'd say it became my conversation about 10 seconds ago. Something in his face tightened. He turned back to Sophie. "We'll talk about the weekend later. Somewhere that isn't here." Then, quieter, meaner, the kind of line built specifically to leave a mark after he was already gone. "You used to have standards, sophomore guess that changed along with everything else." He got back in his car and left before either of us could answer, tires loud against the gravel, and the silence he left behind was worse than anything he'd actually said out loud. Sophie stood very still, staring at the spot where his car had been. "I'm sorry," she said. "That should never have happened here. Don't apologize for him." "I'm not apologizing for him. I'm apologizing that you had to watch it." She pressed the heel of her hand against one eye, quick, like she was stopping something before it could start. This is exactly why I don't want people to know the whole situation. It gets messy, and then people start deciding what kind of woman lets her life get this messy. Nobody decent thinks that. You'd be surprised. She picked her cart back up, hands not quite steady. I should finish the kitchen. Sophie. Please, Ryan. Not right now. I let her go, because that was what she needed, but I stood in the driveway a long time after she'd gone back inside, replaying the way Derek had looked at me, like I was some inconvenient complication in a story he still believed he controlled. I did not like how much that afternoon had rearranged the furniture of what I'd been telling myself this was. Because here is the truth I'd been avoiding since the morning she showed up on my porch. This had stopped being about hiring a cleaner sometime around the second week, and I had been pretending otherwise mostly for my own comfort. The next real turn came at, of all places, a work event. My firm was hosting a fundraising dinner for a housing nonprofit we partnered with, the kind of evening with good lighting and better wine where everyone talks slightly louder than necessary about how meaningful the work is. I hadn't planned on bringing anyone. Then, almost without meaning to, in a conversation that started about something else entirely, I asked Sophie if she'd want to come. As what? She asked, careful, like the question had teeth in it. As my guest. There'll be good food and terrible small talk. I could use someone in the room I actually want to talk to. She studied me a long moment. People will ask who I am. I'll tell them the truth. You're someone I used to know, and someone I'm glad I know again. That earned me the smallest smile I'd seen from her since she'd walked back into my life. That's dangerously close to a nice thing to say. Don't get used to it. She came. She wore a dark green dress that had nothing to do with cleaning supplies or custody arrangements, and for one evening she looked like exactly what she used to be before her life folded in on itself, sharp and composed and entirely capable of holding a room. I introduced her simply, an old friend, and mostly people accepted that at face value and moved on to talking about themselves, which is what people at those dinners are usually there to do anyway. Then my business partner's wife, a woman named Carol who had never once in her life let a piece of gossip pass by unexamined, cornered Sophie near the dessert table with a smile that had too many teeth in it. Sophie Bennett, Carol said, like she was solving a puzzle out loud. I thought that name sounded familiar. Didn't you used to run operations for Halcyon Group? A long time ago, Sophie said evenly. And now you're. Carol let the sentence trail off, eyebrows doing the rest of the sentence for her. Now I run a cleaning business, Sophie said, without a flicker of shame in it, which I found, watching from a few feet away, more impressive than anything else that whole evening. Turns out running a department and running a route of houses both come down to logistics and not letting people waste your time. I've gotten quite good at both. Carol blinked, clearly having expected embarrassment and receiving none. Well. That's very practical of you. It is, Sophie said pleasantly, and reached for a strawberry off the dessert table like the conversation had already ended, because as far as she was concerned, it had. I caught her eye across the room a moment later, and she gave me a look that said, very clearly, I heard everything that just happened, and I handled it, and I don't need you to fix it. I respected that more than I could have explained to her right then. Later that night, standing near the valet stand while we waited for my car, she turned to me with her arms crossed against the cold. Carol's going to tell everyone at your firm that you brought your maid to a fundraiser. Carol can tell everyone whatever she wants. Doesn't that bother you? For your reputation? I thought about that question longer than it probably deserved. I spent 10 years building a reputation for being careful, I said. Careful with money, careful with plans, careful enough that nothing ever surprised me. I'm starting to think careful isn't the same thing as happy. Sophie went very quiet. That's not the kind of thing you say to a woman who cleans your bathroom twice a week, Ryan. Maybe I'm not talking to the woman who cleans my bathroom. She looked at me for a long moment under the valet lights, something uncertain and something hopeful both fighting for space on her face at once. You should be careful, she said softly. I come with a lot of complication right now. I noticed. I mean it. Derek. Money. A kid who needs stability more than she needs anything else in the world. I noticed that too. And you're still standing here. I'm still standing here. She didn't say anything else that night, but she didn't step back either, and sometimes that's its own kind of answer. The real crisis, the one that forced everything into the open, came about 6 weeks later, on a Wednesday I will not forget for the rest of my life. Sophie called me in the middle of the afternoon, which she had never once done, and her voice on the other end was thin in a way that scared me before she'd even finished her first sentence. "Derek's filed something," she said. "A motion, a custody thing. I don't fully understand it yet, my lawyer's calling me back, but he's saying I'm unfit because of, and I'm quoting him now, unstable employment and a, quote, inappropriate living situation." What does that mean, inappropriate living situation? "It means Carol talks to more people than I gave her credit for," Sophie said, and I could hear her trying not to fall apart and mostly succeeding. "It means he's using the fact that I clean your house, and that I brought Mia there once, and that I was your date at some dinner, to make a judge think I've lost my mind and my morals at the same time. Ryan, I could lose weekends with my daughter over this. Over a granola bar and a green dress. That's not going to happen. You don't know that. You don't know how these things go. Then we find out together. What does your lawyer need?" There was a pause on the line, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Why would you do that? Why would you get anywhere near this?" "Because you didn't do anything wrong, and I'm not going to stand outside this one just because it might make my life more complicated." Ryan. "Sophie. Tell me what your lawyer needs." What her lawyer needed, it turned out, was a great deal of unglamorous paperwork, employment verification, a statement about the nature of her work at my house, character references, the kind of dull bureaucratic scaffolding that ends up deciding enormous things about people's lives. I gave a statement. I meant every word of it. I said, under oath, in writing, that Sophie Bennett was the most reliable, most conscientious person I had ever employed in any capacity, and that any suggestion her work or her personal life posed a risk to her daughter was, in my direct observation, without merit. The hearing itself happened on a gray Tuesday morning 3 weeks later, and I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom because Sophie had asked me to be nearby without asking me to be inside, which I understood without needing it explained. Derek showed up in a suit that cost more than most people's rent, flanked by a lawyer who clearly specialized in making reasonable people sound unreasonable on paper. I watched Sophie walk past me toward the courtroom doors, her chin up, her hand steady even though I knew, because I knew her now in a way I hadn't let myself admit until that morning, that underneath the steadiness she was terrified. "You've got this," I said. She paused just long enough to look back at me. "Thank you for being here. Where else would I be?" It wasn't a question, and she didn't treat it like one. The hearing lasted just under 2 hours. I don't know everything that was said in that room, because I wasn't allowed inside, but Sophie told me afterward, sitting in my car in the courthouse parking lot with her hands still shaking slightly around a coffee she wasn't drinking, that the judge had looked at Derek's motion, looked at the employment records, looked at my statement and 3 others like it, and had, in the judge's own words, found absolutely no evidence that Sophie Bennett's living or working arrangements constituted anything other than a mother doing everything in her power to keep her child fed, housed, and picked up from school on time. The custody arrangement stayed exactly as it was. Derek's attempt to weaponize a granola bar and a green dress had cost him a great deal of money and accomplished nothing at all. "He's going to be furious," Sophie said, staring out the windshield. "Let him be furious somewhere that isn't near you." She laughed, short and a little watery. "You say that like it's simple." "It is simple. It's just not easy. Different things." She turned to look at me then, really look, the way she had on my porch that first morning, except everything underneath the look had changed completely. "You didn't have to do any of this," she said. "The statement, the sitting outside, all of it. You had a whole quiet life before I showed up on your doorstep with a cleaning cart." "I had a whole empty life," I said. "I just hadn't noticed the difference yet." Something in her face broke open then, gently, the way ice gives way in early spring instead of all at once. "Ryan. I'm not asking you for anything," I said, echoing, without quite meaning to, words Diane might have said in another story, words that seemed to belong to anyone who'd ever loved someone carefully after being burned once already. "I'm telling you that I'm glad the agency sent you to the wrong address, or the right one, depending how you look at it. I'm glad every single day you've shown up since." She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she reached over and took my hand, right there in the courthouse parking lot, coffee going cold in the cup holder between us, and that was the whole answer I needed. Things did not become simple after that, because things involving a 6-year-old, an angry ex-husband, and two people rebuilding something they'd both once let go of are never simple, but they did become honest, and honest turned out to matter a great deal more than simple ever had. Sophie stopped taking cleaning jobs about 8 months later, not because she needed to, but because the same drive that had run a department for 8 years finally found somewhere new to point itself. She started a small residential organizing and property management company, the kind of business built on exactly the skills she'd spent a year and a half pretending she didn't still have, and within a year she had 3 employees and a client list longer than the one she used to manage staff for. I was, for the record, no longer a client. I had become, somewhere in the space of those months, something considerably harder to put a job title on. Mia started calling me by my first name sometime around the 6-month mark, which Sophie told me, laughing, was the highest honor a 6-year-old is capable of bestowing on an adult. She still complains about my Wi-Fi. I have since upgraded it twice, mostly for her. Derek, for what it's worth, eventually stopped trying to use the custody arrangement as a weapon, partly because the court made it expensive for him to keep trying, and partly, I suspect, because watching Sophie build something entirely her own, without needing anything at all from him, took most of the wind out of whatever grievance he thought he was still owed. 2 years after the morning she showed up on my porch with a bucket of supplies and a look on her face like she'd seen a ghost, I asked Sophie to marry me, not with some elaborate plan or a room full of witnesses, but in my own kitchen, the same kitchen where she'd once stood telling me about a $1,400 medical bill like it was the whole shape of her life. I told her the kitchen had been quiet before she walked into it, and I hadn't understood how quiet until she filled it up, first with a vacuum cleaner, and then with a 6-year-old's opinions about frog rights, and then, eventually, with everything else that mattered. She said yes before I'd even finished getting the box open, which she still teases me about, and I still tell her it only proves she knew exactly what she wanted the second time around, unlike the first time she'd had to figure it out from 3 states away. Mia was our flower girl. She took the job as seriously as she'd once taken the matter of unfair frog games, and to this day she reminds people, unprompted, that she approved of me from the very first granola bar. People ask us sometimes how we ended up together, and Sophie usually starts with, "He hired me to clean his house," and lets the pause do the rest of the work, watching people's faces try to guess the ending before she gives it to them. I usually finish it with, "She ended up cleaning up a lot more than the house," which she pretends to find unbearable every single time, and secretly, I think, does not. The truth underneath all of it is simpler than either version. 10 years ago, I let someone go because I told myself that was the mature thing to do, the generous thing, the thing that proved I loved her enough to not hold her back. What I learned, standing in my own doorway a decade later looking at her face over a supply bucket, is that sometimes life hands you the exact same person twice, in a completely different shape, and the only real question left is whether you're brave enough to recognize what you're looking at before it walks back out the door again. I was. Barely. But I was. So here's what I want to know from you. If your ex showed up at your door in the last place you ever expected to find them, would you have opened it, or would you have found a reason to send them away? And has anyone from your past ever come back into your life looking completely different than the person you remembered? Tell me your story in the comments, I read every single one. And if this one got to you, hit like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.